Hi everyone, in this hard surface modeling exercise we're going to do another Scifi floor panel which is based on a design by Vitaly Bulgarov, and this floor panel is part of a kitbash set you can purchase from Vitaly Bulgarov. I love the designs for his Scifi floor panels, and he did those in Fusion 360 I think, and I was trying to recreate the ones that I like best in Cinema 4D. And one of the reasons I'm trying to recreate these in Cinema 4D is to model those panels with proper topology. And because these were done in Fusion 360, the topology looks something like this. And that is a pretty big mess. So we're going to try and model this using proper topology in Cinema 4D. I hope you'll enjoy this tutorial, so let's get started. Before we get started, make sure to download the project file that I've provided, and in this project file you will already find the reference image. I've put it in the top view, and I've made this pretty huge, and the reason for that is because we have such small details and it's just going to be a lot easier to model those at a large scale. We will start this with a plane, and we need 2 by 2 segments. I'm going to scale this up to about here. And I'm also going to scale it on the x-axis, and I'll do 3400 by 2100. Let's make this editable, and because the object is symmetrical left to right and top to bottom, we can get rid of all of these points and just focus on this area here. First of all, I'm going to add some loop cuts to define the main shapes here. Something like this. And we can scale these points. Let's also scale these ones. And I'll move these ones down a little bit, like so. And then we can select these polygons here and extrude them. And I'll use an offset of 15 here. And let's get rid of that polygon at the center. And you can see in the reference image that we also have this bevel here. So I'm going to add that, but before I do, I'm going to dissolve these edges in order to make the bevel work properly. So let's select these edges, and I will bevel these using limit, and I'll use the same offset that I used for extruding, which is 15. Let's deselect everything and optimize the object. And we also need to add roundness to the corners. So I'm going to select these edges here. And bevel those. And let's do something like this. And I'll use a couple of subdivisions. Deselect everything, optimize the object, and then I'm going to select all of these polygons here and melt them into an n-gon. And then I'm going to create some new geometry by making some cuts here. And we could also add some cuts here. And I'm going to select these n-gons here and remove them. And you can see this is looking a bit nasty, but we can fix that by reducing the Phong angle to 33, and now everything looks fine. Next I'm going to add these holes here. And before I do, I need to make a couple more cuts. I'll add one here and one over here. And then we can select these edges here. And using the slide tool, I'm going to clone these by holding down the Control key. And I'll do an offset of 10. And I'll move these points over a little bit to about here. And let's also get rid of these stray points here. And over here I'm going to select these edges and clone them as well. Again, I'm using an offset of 10 or minus 10 here. And I'll move this edge over to about here. Now we can select these polygons. And I'm going to quick extrude these down a bit, and I'm going to scale them to 0. And I'll put them at -50. Something like this. Let's delete these polygons here. And we've got some edges here that we don't need. I'll just select these and dissolve them. Then I'm going to select all of these edges here. And these ones, and I'll quick extrude these down a bit. And let's ring select these polygons and extrude them. Let's do an offset of 12, just to add that little edge here. And I'll select these polygons and delete them. And I'll also delete the polygons at the bottom and optimize the object again. I also want to get rid of the n-gons here. And these ones I'm going to dissolve by adding some cuts. Before I do though, I think I'll just move this edge over. And I'll move this edge over as well. Something like this. And I'll select these two and run a script from the HB modeling bundle, which is called line up. And I'll just move this point over a little bit to about here. And then I'm going to connect these points here and these ones. And I'm trying to keep quads as much as possible. We don't really need to on this hard surface model, but I'll try and do it anyway. I'm also going to connect the points over here. And let's select these ones. I don't like the angle of these edges here. Something like this could be a problem when we try and bevel the edges. So I'll just move these over a little bit to about here maybe. And I'm also going to adjust this hole by scaling these points down a little bit to about here. And that's looking good so far. Next I'm going to add this detail here. And in order to be able to do that, we need to add a couple more cuts. And this time I'm using the line cut tool and switch off single line. And now I can hold down Shift and make cuts like this. I'm also going to move these edges away from that detail a little bit. And I'll create sort of an outline around some of the details. And the reason is because these round corners here will create some geometry, and I don't want this geometry to propagate into the rest of the mesh. So we're going to have all of the edges coming from this area and on the corner points of this outline I created around these around this detail. And let's also clean up the mesh a little bit by connecting these points and by adding some more cuts. And now we can select this polygon here and use extrude inner and extrude this down a little bit. And I'll extrude this -50. And I'll ring select these edges here and bevel them. And I'm using 5 subdivisions again. And I'm going to select the n-gons here at the top and remove them. And this will give us triangles. I'll try and turn these into quads by dissolving every other edge here. And that's the reason why I used 5 subdivisions, so I can remove edges and get all quads. And quads like this, to be honest, are not good practice because we have polygons that are folding in on themselves. When you use subdivision surfaces, this will be a problem, and it can also be a problem on hard surface models. And here we already have one. So sometimes these polygons turn black. And we could just keep the triangles. But let's go ahead and find out if we can solve this problem. So sometimes it helps if you remove the polygon and just use close polygon hole and close that again. In this case, that didn't do anything. We just got the same problem. We could also try and use the polygon pen and create 2 new polygons and then dissolve this edge. And in this case, that worked. So we've got whole quads here. Now let's go ahead and select this n-gon here. I'm going to use extrude inner and extrude this down to about here. And let's extrude this up 50 centimeters. And then I'm going to grow the selection by hitting UY, and I'm going to split these polygons off. And this will be, let's call this lid. And this is our panel base. And let's delete these UVW tags, we don't really need these. And I'll switch off the lid, select the panel base, delete these polygons, optimize, and I'll select these edges and extrude them in a little bit. And then I'll just dissolve these edges here. And I just did that so we have a little more geometry underneath that lid. And this lid is symmetrical, so before I add the details, I'm going to connect the edges here. And we can delete all of these points and just work on this area here. And I'll just make some cuts to get rid of the n-gons. So I'll just remove this one. And that didn't work so well. I'll just undo that. And I'll connect the points manually like this. I also want to add some screw holes. And for this I'm going to add a cylinder. And I'll snap it to this point here. Scale it down. And I'll give this maybe 16 rotation segments. Let's move this up a little bit. And I'll put this lid in a bool object and add the cylinder. And I don't want the geometry to continue all the way to over here. So I'll just add a couple more cuts, one here and one here. And for the bool object, I want to create a single object and hide the new edges. Let's make this editable, rename it to lid, and get rid of these tags. And I'll just weld some of these points. And it looks like we need to connect these ones. And I'll also connect these points. These ones and these ones. I'm also going to close this polygon hole, select the n-gon, extrude inner, turn this into a point selection and weld these points to the center. And over here I'm going to connect these points and these ones. And we can dissolve these edges here. So it's all quads again. And I'm also going to get rid of every other edge here. And in this case we need to melt the polygons or the edges instead of dissolving them. The reason is because if I use dissolve, you can see over here and over here the points get deleted as well. So instead of dissolving, I'm going to melt these edges so we can keep those points. And let's go ahead and extrude this down a little bit, something like this maybe. And let's move the axis to, let's move it to the top and all the way over here. So now we can use a symmetry object, and let's use another one, switch the plane to XY, and I'll make this editable. And now we can take care of this detail at the center here. I just select these edges and bevel them to about here. We don't need any subdivisions. And we can select these polygons, use extrude inner, and extrude these down a little bit. Let's do something like this. And then we can select these edges here. And I'm going to bevel these. All the way, something like this. I'll optimize the object, and we need a couple more edges here because we need to continue these ones. And I'll do this in the top view, and I'll just make a cut like this, and another one over here. And it looks like we need to connect these points. And these ones over here. I'll also connect these points. Actually, I need to make a cut here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's undo this. I'm going to make a cut over here, and I'll get rid of all of these edges here again. Weld these points. And I'll just delete half of the object. And I'll select these edges and use the HB even distribution script from the HB modeling bundle to even out the geometry here. And I'll also connect these points. And the reason I created the geometry like this is so we can get quads here. And I don't want all of these edges to be welded to this point and form a pole. And the reason for that is because I want to bevel these objects. And you can see we're getting a nice and clean bevel here. But if I bring all of these points up to this one, something like this will happen. So bearing in mind that we also want to bevel the edges, we need to be careful how we generate the geometry. So we've got 152 polygons and it should all be quads. Let's put this in a symmetry object. I'll just delete the bevel deformer, make this editable. And that's our first detail. Next, I'm going to add this detail here. And we need some more geometry before we can do that. So I'll make a couple more cuts. I'll move these edges over a little bit, and let's move these ones over to here. And I think I'm going to add an additional cut here. And remove some of the n-gons here. Turn these into quads. And I'll move these points back a bit. And it looks like we're having an issue here. I'll just select these polygons, melt them, and then connect these points to turn this into quads up here. And over here I'll connect these points and these ones, and then I'll just add another edge in between here by connecting these 2 points. And I'll just move this one over like so. I'm going to use extrude inner again to extrude this polygon, and I'll scale it down a bit. And let's extrude this. Again, I'll do -50. I'll also switch on ambient occlusion so we're getting some contact shadows. Let's ring select these edges here. And I'll bevel them. And I've used 5 subdivisions again. Let's deselect everything and optimize. And then we can remove the n-gons and turn these into quads. We do get one triangle here, and if you want to remove that, what you could do is select this edge and bevel it with no subdivisions. Let's use a small offset, optimize, then I'll just weld these points. And then I can select these edges here. Looks like I'll just have to select these manually. I'm also going to select the ones down here. And I'll run the even distribution script. So we have all quads here. Let's do the same thing over here. First bevel this edge, optimize the object, weld these points, select these edges and run the even distribution script. And we also need to weld the points here. Then we can connect these ones to create quads. And we also need to weld these ones and these ones. Now let's select the n-gon down here, and I'll use extrude inner and then extrude this up. And I'll use extrude inner again. And then just scale these points down. And then I'll just weld these ones. And these ones. And we can select every other edge and dissolve it to create quads. Let's select this polygon and extrude it down a bit. And I'll select these edges and bevel them. And I'll use a couple of subdivisions. Connect these points, and it looks like we need an additional edge here at the center, so I'm just going to connect this edge, connect these points, and we'll continue this edge later. And it also looks like we need one more edge down here to be able to turn all of this into quads. So I'm going to bevel this. With no subdivisions and a small offset. Optimize the object, and I'll just select these edges here. run the even distribution script, and over here I'll do the same thing. Connect these points, connect this edge. And let's even out the geometry here. And we still have a trine there. I'm just going to connect these edges here. Run the even distribution script again, and I'm going to weld these points. So now it's all quads. Same over here. I'll just connect these points. And these ones, get rid of this edge. And before I add that additional edge, I'll just select the polygons at the top. And I think I'm also going to split this off. Because we need this additional edge, we would have to continue it to the center and to the side of the panel. I don't really want to do that. So I'll just select these polygons here. Grow the selection, split these off. And let's just call this detail 1. Delete these polygons, optimize the object. And now I can make this cut. And we're still keeping quads. Let's connect these points and these ones over here. And I'll extrude these edges in a little bit and dissolve these ones. And that's our second detail. Let's move on to this detail over here. And for this we need another edge. So I'm going to create one over here. Let's just move these edges over a little bit. I'll also create an edge here and another one here. And because we have a hole at the bottom of this area, we don't need to continue these edges all the way to the center. We could also bevel this corner here. So let's select this edge, use the bevel tool, and I'll do 5 subdivisions. And let's increase the offset to something like this maybe. Deselect everything, optimize, and I'll make a couple of cuts. Let's do one here. I'll also do one here. Let's do it like this. And this gives us a triangle here. We can get rid of that by adding a cut here. Let me switch off visible only. So I'll just make a cut like this. And then we can move this point over to here. I'm also going to remove this n-gon. And this corner here is going to be a problem when we bevel the edges. So we need to change the topology in order to make sure that we get clean bevels here. And what I'll do to make this happen is I'll connect these points here, and let's get rid of these edges. And then I'll just make cuts like this. Let's use a bevel deformer to see how that works. And we do have an issue here. Let's switch that off. I'll just deselect everything and optimize the object. A couple of points got removed, so hopefully that solves that problem. And it did. And you can see with topology like this, we're getting nice and clean bevels. So let's select this polygon and use extrude inner like before. I'm also going to scale this a little bit. Let's extrude this down. Ring select the edges on the inside, bevel, again using 5 subdivisions. Deselect everything and optimize the object. And I'll select these edges and bevel them with no subdivisions. And let's give this a tiny offset. I'm going to weld the points here. And over here. Optimize again. I'll select these edges here and run the even distribution script. And let's create quads. And I'll use extrude inner to extrude the n-gon down at the bottom. And I'm not going to extrude this up. Well, we could do that because we need this at the top anyway. And then I'll just split this n-gon off. This will be detail number 2. Select the panel base, grow the selection, delete the polygons and optimize the object. And like before, I'm going to select these edges, extrude them in a little bit, and dissolve these edges here. And then we can switch off everything else and focus on our detail here. First of all, I'm going to center the axis. And I'll connect these points. I'll also connect these edges. And turn these areas into quads if I can. And we're getting a triangle here. So what I'll do is I'll just undo that. Select one of these edges and connect them. So I've created an additional point here, and then we can select all of these edges here and run the even distribution script. And now we've got all quads here. Let's connect these edges. Delete this half and then use a symmetry object, make this editable. I'll just pull this down here. And we need to make some more cuts here to define the areas where we want our details to be. I'm just going to scale this one up a little bit to about here. And this is where the cutouts will be. We also need to define areas where these holes will be. So let's do something like this. And just get rid of half of the object for now, but first I need to connect these edges here and then delete these points. And I'll make a cut like this. Switch off single line, and I'll just continue that over to here. And I'll do the same thing here. We also need a cut here. And then we can move these points over a little bit. We can connect these points. And these edges. And over here, I guess we could just connect these points and these edges and move this point over a little bit. So that's looking good so far. Let's use a symmetry object. Make it editable. And I think we can now extrude these polygons down with caps. Let's do an offset of -50. Delete all the polygons at the bottom and optimize the object. And I'm going to select everything and reverse the normals. And we need to move these polygons down a little bit. And we don't have the topology to support that. And what I'll do is I'll just make another cut. And then just weld these points here. So now we can select these ones. If you take a look at the top view, this area goes down a little bit. So let's go ahead and move these polygons down. Something like this maybe. Looks fine. And I'm going to clone these edges. And these ones. just reselect these. I'll just undo what I did because I made a mistake. Instead of, I should have scaled these edges, and let's do 58, and then we can make these the same width. And we can also get rid of half of the object again, but before I do, I'm going to put these holes in there. So I'll snap a cylinder to this point and scale it down to the size that I need. And since these are very small holes, I'll go for 8 rotation segments. And let's make a copy and snap it to this point here. And I'll make this a child of the other cylinder, and then we can use a bool object and put these in there. And looks like we need to move these up a little bit. I'll create a single object. I don't need to hide the edges because we're getting clean geometry. And let's make this editable. Delete the tags. Rename this to detail 2. And I'm going to close the polygon holes. Connect these points, and we need to make cuts like this to turn these into quads. And I'm going to extrude these down without caps. And let's select these polygons. I'm going to use extrude inner. Move these points over a little bit. And let's extrude these down. Ring select these edges. And we need to deselect some. Let's bevel these with 5 subdivisions. I'll just increase the offset. Let me undo that. Hit new transform. Let's bring the offset down to about here. Deselect everything and optimize the object. And over here we could remove this edge and get a quad here. Let's move this point over a little bit to turn this into a proper quad. And I guess we could do the same thing here. Let's just dissolve this edge and turn these into quads. I'm just trying to turn this into quad topology. We still got triangles here. We could just connect these points here. Let's try and weld these down. And it looks like we need to fix this area here. I'll just select this edge here. And I'll make another cut like so. And then we can dissolve this edge. Let's check the other side. Let's get rid of half of the object. First of all, let's connect these points. I also need to fix these areas here. I'll just select these points so I know where to cut. Let's dissolve these edges here. And I'm going to add another edge loop here. I'll move this edge up a little bit. Delete these polygons. And I'll extrude these edges down. And snap them to here. And use stitch and sew to connect the polygons. So we're getting this cut out here. And I'm going to delete all of these edges. Select these ones and extrude them down. And I'll snap them down to this edge here. And using the polygon pen, I'm going to close the holes here. That's looking good. And we need to bevel these edges. And I'll do 3 subdivisions here, which means we can still turn these areas into quads. Let's deselect everything and optimize. We have 12 n-gons here. So let's go ahead and remove those. And I'll just weld these 2 points. Connect these points and these ones. Let's try and optimize the object, and that's getting rid of all of the other n-gons in this case. And we do have some triangles in there. I'll try and get rid of those. First of all, let's put this in a symmetry object. Change the mirror plane. Make the symmetry object editable. And let's see what we can do about these triangles. I think I'll just remove all of these edges for now by dissolving them. just reconnect those points. So that's giving us quads up here. And I'll try to reduce the geometry a little bit. And over here, we could just delete this edge and move this point over a little bit. And I'm not really liking the geometry here. Let's select all of these points here. And weld these. Let me undo that. And let's try that again. Let's connect these points and these ones. And there we go. That's looking a little bit better. We could just get rid of this edge here, turn this into a quad. And we still have some triangles. In these areas here, but we can easily fix that by just welding the points here. And dissolving these edges. And there we go. Now we've got all quads. Let me just try and put this, or use a bevel deformer on this. see how it looks. You can see we're getting a bit of distortion here and some issues in these areas. Maybe we can fix that by selecting these points here, and I'll just move these over. Switch that to uniform. If I bring that bevel down a little bit, that fixes the issue. So this one was just about making the bevel a little bit smaller. Let's go ahead and put that panel base in a symmetry object. And let's use a second one. Change the mirror plane. And I'll just make the other objects children of the panel base, and that will mirror these over. So this is what we got so far. Before we continue, let's do a final check and make sure that everything's okay. And I'm checking for n-gons and triangles. So for detail number 2, we have all quads. Let's check detail number 1. And we have a couple of n-gons here. The first thing I'll try is optimize everything. And in this case, that does the trick. Let's select the quads, and it's all quads on this one. Let's check the lid. It's all quads as well. And we have 11 n-gons on the panel base. Let's go ahead and select them. This n-gon over here, we will remove this one once we've added the details at the center, so we don't need to worry about this one. Let's go ahead and check these ones out. Over here we have 2 points. We can simply weld these. And over here we just need to make a cut. And I'll make another cut over here to get rid of this n-gon. Same over here. And we can continue these edges here to get rid of the n-gons in this area. And let's have a look at these. And what I'll do over here is I'll just add 2 more cuts to get rid of these n-gons. So now we have only one n-gon left, and it's this one over here. So this is the end of part 1 of this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope I'll see you again in part 2.